Hello everyone and thank you for joining our today's webinar which is on religious radicalism and the security of South Asia. I am Aruna Anam Khan from South Asia Research Institute for Minorities and I am a senior research associate over here. For our today's webinar we have 6 international speakers. We have Professor Dr. Muhammad Ahmed Qadri from Pakistan, Ms. Cynthia Striffen from India, Sir Anwar Arkani from Canada, Sir Dhananjaya from India, and Dr. Mariam Shah Uniza Nasir from Maldives. Thank you for joining us today.
And I am co-host. My name is Saida Kisai Zaira. I am researcher associate at South Asia Research Institute for Minorities. We welcome you all. Now I would like to invite Ms. Cynthia Steffen, who is from India. She is independent media professional, gender and development policy research analyst. May you continue now.
I'm indeed privileged to be here today and to be talking on such an important subject. As you know, the Asian continent is the home to a number of the world religions that are very much, in practice even to this day. So we have, the Asian continent has the Christian, that was born on the Asian, landmass. So was the Islam. So was Buddhism and Jainism, Sikhism. So a large number of this. There is some destiny in this land that we have, so many, the religions which are born here. And therefore, it is a very spiritually advanced population, civilizations that exist in our culture. And right now, into the 21st century, many of these religions continue to be very important in the life of our country and of South Asia, of the SAARC nations. So we have of the 7 SAARC nations, we have very diverse, lot of diversity within the countries, and there are many, populations. All the South Asian countries have diverse religious identities. They are not monolithic, and therefore there are also very many issues that relate to the religious minorities over here in the SAARC countries. So as of now, some of the all of us are aware of the issues of that the issue of minorities is like a political hot potato also. But I would like to talk about not the politics, but the humanitarian issues relating to the identities and lives and the quality of life of religious minorities in the country. I think that is a very crucial aspect. Whether it is in India, where there is a lot, everybody knows in the world that there is a lot of majoritarian, culture, and there are lots of minorities here, including Buddhists, Sikhs, Muslims, Christians, Parsis, and others like animist, tribal faiths. So there are many religious identities, diversities, and we have in Pakistan also. We have Sikhs as well as Christian minorities, religious minorities. Yeah, I'm not sure about the Maldives, whether I know that Maldives is a Muslim majority country, but I believe that there are a very small number of Christians also, probably who have migrated and come there for work. So there are many. Also, for instance, in South Asia, in Burma, one of the biggest, what to say, humanitarian and refugee crises are in the among the Rohingya community, who are ethnically distinct and also have a Muslim identity. And so there are many concerns about the issues of Rohingya Muslims. In fact, even here in Bangalore, we have a few. We have about 150 or so of them made of 40 families. And even yesterday, there was a news report of how the people here are struggling. Because they also, some of them have migrated from Bangladesh, and they're Bengali speaking in their language. And so they are difficult to distinguish from Bengali Muslims in India. So they have managed to survive so long. But now that many of them were actually officially settled here from UNHCR, they have identity, but the locals are exploiting them severely. So these are also issues that exist over here in India, right here now in the city of Bangalore even. So and so there is an important aspect. In fact, the meeting I just came out of to participate here has to do with the Christian minority identity in India, and how whether, and the question was, why is it that though we are a community which is highly contributing to the national life through our health institutions, our educational institutions, why is it that our political representation is at a low ebb and it is continuing to decrease? So these are some of the concerns that we have as a democratic country. Christians in India are raising these issues, because then there come many issues relating to relating to education, livelihoods, marriage. There are many issues, and so these are some of the issues that we face in India. In Sri Lanka, we know that there has been a long history of ethnic diversity, which are also linked to language, because the ethnic Sinhalese are also Buddhist by religion. Then there are Tamils who are Hindu by religion, and there are Muslims who have their own identity, very distinct. And of late, which was never the case earlier, but of late we have found that there are economic issues, cultural issues, and even political and security issues that have become uncovered in the recent past in even Sri Lanka. All of us remember that the Easter Day blast, the bomb blast that took place in Sri Lanka, and so it is a very unheard of thing that the Islamic terrorists were the ones who placed the bomb in a church. It was not known that there would be that there would be tensions, but that was in reaction to some other events that happened in another country. So therefore, the issue of religious minorities it is a distinct identity, no doubt. But I think the more important thing is we are all humans. We are all human beings. Similarly, I would say that in Bangladesh, for instance, there are Hindu minority. There was a sizable number of Hindu population, but after they became a distinct nation, I suppose a lot of Hindus may have migrated, or naturally they must have passed away, and so the numbers of Hindus in Bangladesh and also in Pakistan are on the decline. Then this is often brought up as an issue in debates on religious minorities in India, by the Saffron forces in our country. There's also very good number of Christians in Pakistan. In fact, I understand that the figure is something like 10%. And there also there are issues. We know that some of these belong to marginalized sections in Pakistan, and they tend to be from quite economically poor backgrounds. So there's a lot of issues that relate to Christians and Hindus in Pakistan as well. So there is always this gap between the population and the way the democratic rights and the quality of life of the minorities are a challenge in the country, whether in all over South Asia. So I think this is, I really value the fact that SARIM is working on this, has picked on South Asia as an important hotspot for issues of minorities. And I believe that if we are, able to do a good job, raise these issues, talk about these things, that we can, really be a positive force in the society in order to have a positive impact upon the way, the quality of life of people from religious minorities in other countries, in each other's countries, really give, can look forward to. And I think that this is because it is essentially, I would say, when we die, we all have blood running under our skin, and when we die, we all, pass away, and our bodies return to the elements. So our faith may not endure to be seen. It's only an individual matter that what we believe in the afterlife. That is not a physical thing. But I believe that as human beings, when we are living in a country, when we are living in a material world, the material conditions in which we live, they are also important. And not only that, our citizenship rights and entitlements are also important. And I believe that with this focus of SARIM and other similarly oriented positive approaches, we will be able to have a lot of positive impact on policy making, on governance, on the international community by raising issues relating to the concerns of minorities in other countries. I believe that this is the way forward in a pluralistic postmodern world where identity becomes a very, very important marker. And in fact, there's no one identity, but there are people have multiple identities. So I'm a woman, I'm a Christian, I'm an Indian, I'm a feminist, I'm a mother. So we all have multiple identities, and various parts of our identity surface at various times. And so it should not become their own binaries. In fact, we need to really remember that when we honor diversity and respect each other as human beings, that is when the real, we strike a blow for a one world of justice, unity, peace. And I think that not only for justice, unity, peace for now, but also for the future, because as the world changes, the younger generation really need to have something to look forward to. We have to leave a better world for the children, and we have said another world is possible. There have been international programs in which the title has been "Another World is Possible." We should say a better world is possible, because we know that our world needs to be made a better world. And I feel that in this context, it is very important for all of us to be, and for that the best approach would be for people to talk. So people to people contact becomes really important. The humanitarian crises, we need to speak up for those who cannot speak about their own humanitarian crises, the crises that children face, that women face. I think those are very, very severe, particularly when it comes to international and border related issues. So I think SARIM can play a really positive role. And since my job has been to give an overview of, and I haven't even touched upon the issue of, for instance, of Nepal, because Nepal is a country which was known to be a Hindu nation, but now it has acquired a democratic character. But there also they have issues with plains folk and the hill folk and the Dalits. So there are concerns among all our countries on these issues. So we need to really be a force for good. And I commend SARIM and our team for this effort to promote dialogue and to bring us together on a common platform so that we can become the harbingers of a better world. And we can say a better world is possible. A kinder world is possible. A more just world is possible. A more peaceful world is possible. A happier world is possible. I thank you so much for your patient hearing, and I request and I hand the session back to the organizers. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Now, I would like to invite Professor Dr. Muhammad Ahmed Qadri, who is a renowned scholar from Pakistan, and he is a founding director of Islamic Education and Cultural Research Center, and is also a former Dean Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences and Faculty of Islamic Studies from University of Karachi. Sir, you may continue now.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear international community friends, good evening. Assalamu alaikum. Luckily, I heard few words from a scholar who was talking about various aspects of religio-political elite and their effects in South Asia. Fine, good, I appreciate. Hopefully everyone is sitting here with a smiling face and consuming things from various cultures so that we could create international culture for the sake of peace and relationship with each other. Today, the world is a challenge for everyone. Why? Due to specific targeted zones and theoretical approaches. These approaches, without methods, are causing serious mental health in the world. The term of Islamophobia, the term of religio-political influence, the terms of socio-political dimensional conditions and variables, and all terminologies converting into Indian culture, Pakistani culture, Afghani culture, Bangladeshi culture, or international cultures understood as or interpreted as the theory of convenience. The theory of convenience has ruined the basic concept of good governance. Good governance is not an asset of any identity or nation. It is a system which accommodates international cultures and respect for all. Unfortunately, across the boundaries, I look for my own benefit. Obviously, in diplomatic behaviorism and diplomatic language, it is called the benefit of the nation. It's good, but it does not mean to allow people to intervene into the affair of others and consume yourself or assume yourself or think yourself that you are the person who would be creating peace in the world and the rest of the world would be hyphenated. No, it cannot be allowed. And who's responsible for this? Yes, we human beings living in this planet. What is the reason? Reason, according to Plato, Aristotle, or some important personalities in the past, they always say, and it is true in social science, they always say, man is a selfish animal. Of course, maybe, but animal converting into civic life, into a new digitalized life or global world, has to create a balanced, near to perfect cultural norms and strong ties and relationship with humanity across the boundaries, respecting all cultures, all religions, minorities, and scholars, including the flags of the nations. But what is happening? Radicalism does not mean only to see it into its negative prospects. The perspective of the term may be negative due to my own interpretation. Being a student of social sciences, I can interpret. Extremism. Let me ask you one question. Who is not extremist in the world? Very interesting. Come on, smile, my dear friends. Smile. I'm looking for your smile because I'm attached with you. You're attached with me. This is a serious effort to create such an environment which take us out from the culture of radicalism, extremism, force theory, and decision by my own, which is called reward and punish. Who am I to punish? Who am I to take the law in my hands? Who am I to declare that this nation is extremist, or this person is criminal, or this group or this religion is like this? Who am I? If I create this kind of environment in any part of the world, I would be disturbing, destroying, and ruining the whole peaceful efforts of settlement with others. And unfortunately, it is happening, not from one nation or two nations or three nations. Internationally, it is part of politics. And today we see the world is converting from national state to international state, from national policies and from national politics to international politics. And this has created a kind of extremism in the world. Most of the time, friends from India, when they talk to me, they always say, "Hey, Muhammad, what's happening in Pakistan?" I always smile. I always say, what is happening in India? Just, it is a kind of joke, not from inside, from heart. We respect everybody. But what is percentage of understanding such friendly environment? Like our friends from various parts of the world, they are sitting in front of me. I can recognize they are scholars and they can create a culture of peace in the world. But culture of peace cannot be established if I use it as a slogan. So radicalism and the challenges for minorities in any part of South Asia is a big challenge. Not for Pakistan, not for India, not for Bangladesh or any other countries. It is a big challenge for international peace. NATO forces in Afghanistan, extremist attacks or suicide bombing in Pakistan, challenge or the challenges in Indian territory for their liberty and peace. Also, religious extremism in other parts. These are serious challenges. We will have to address. We will have to realize one thing, that a force, a genuine or strong force to rescue South Asia is force of Indian scholars, Pakistani scholars, Sri Lankan scholars, Bangladeshi scholars, so on and so forth. But what we are doing, you write research articles, I write research articles, everybody is writing so many things, and you can see the peace propagation, but nobody accepts, in excluding few, that we will have to come out from our shells and see why religious extremism has destroyed a peaceful environment in South Asia. I don't talk of political economy. Yes, political economy is another factor. Religious freedom, yes. And socio-political interaction with reference to foreign policy is, these are the basic elements which must be addressed. And the ruling class the ruling elite or civil bureaucracy cannot be negated or neglected for creating a good governance across the boundaries, across the world, seeing what, number one, what is importance of religious radicalism and the security of South Asian minorities, and who will be assuring all these things, the security. Municipal law would be assuring us, and municipal law would be traveling from our specific territory into international territory, and international law would be an umbrella which would be protecting all these basic rotating religious factors. I always say that Islam does not allow any war against any nation, and it does not create any extremist action against any nation. And the example is the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam clearly ordered when he conquered Makkah, the focal point of Muslim government, the focal area from where they migrated. And till now, the war of aggression in Islam is absolutely illegal. If somebody does it, it may be done from any part of the world, from any political party. Like political extremism and the political fundamentalism or political influence in the society. So the religion is a tool which is being used as a political slogan. But if we don't respect minorities, we don't protect minorities, then the constitution of the state is useless. What happened in France? It is in front of us. What happened in other countries? How about the suicide bombings? How about the attacks on temples, churches, mosques in the world? So we, being impartial scholars, we will have to create a syndicate through intercultural communication and identifying the basic factors which are creating authoritarian school of thought in South Asia. We will have to remove that authoritarian school of thought, whether they come out from religion or from sectarian style of thinking, or using the name of religion for the sake of their own political entity and political gain. And this is happening, unfortunately, in South Asia. Minorities may be respected when they are asked for vote. When we need vote, we always become so humble, very nice, very polite, and very flexible person. And once the vote is done, you ran for the election, you got your opportunity, became a part of legislature, then I see myself, might is right. Nobody is there except me. I'm authority. I would use my authority. And this is happening seriously in South Asia. Once the scholars create a sense of understanding with the government, and the government understands and realizes that this is time to revoke multi-fundamentalism or radicalism, which are being used for negative activity in the society. And a forum like this must be considered seriously. But how about the political elite or the political identities or political groups or interest articulated groups which don't allow scholars even to talk? The media, look at media. They would be giving opportunities to dancers, singers, drama artists, and fake storytellers or fabricated story creators. Oh, people would be seeing all these things. And if you peel the onion, what would you find? The end result would be zero. This forum or international serious intellectuals who are impartials, they must unite despite of their religion, countries, identities, thought. People in the world, they may be following socialism, communism, Marxism, liberalism, trade unionism, so on and so forth, and Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Sikhism. But these isms or systems are for you, for me, individualism. It would create internationalism. It would create international state. And I see that this transitional period in the world after the period of COVID-19 is an alarming situation for health, mental peace, and opportunities for the governments. Yeah, why I use this? You know better than me. But also one thing, I guess, we are slowly moving ahead, slowly touching to the boundaries of international states, international state, international political economy. And the United Nations, like the past League of Nations, we have similarities, imbalance of power. And this imbalance has created a stereotype. If you are a great donor, then the great donor would be the great father or the grandmother, whatever you say. Because state is mother. Anyhow, who is creating radicalism? Who is not properly providing safeguard to the minorities of South Asia? And whose responsibility is this? These are the fundamental questions. And with my end note, I would say, who would save it? Obviously, we believe in God, we believe in Allah, and we can see that there is authority according to Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Sikhism, or other religions, Buddhism, everyone belonging to all these religions or cultures. They believe that authority belongs to God, but God never allowed human being to kill his family. As Holy Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, Al-Khalqu Allah. Creation, human being, they are like families of God. Never kill them. Never mistreat. Never overthrow them for your own interest or for your own benefits. And these are the universal facts from Islam, from other religions. So religious radicalism, if we see as a seed for thought, would give us one message. This is time to understand the challenges and disrespect from identified interest articulated groups of the world. They might be saving their own interest, and their face saving would be something else, like television dramas or the Hollywood films, fictions. Create this environment and let the people fight with each other, and let us get knowledge how they are fighting and benefits out of it. This is international war of aggression, not from any religion, but from few people who have negative mindset, but they are getting things as they required, increasing their businesses, increasing their power, increasing their relations in the world, and they also become part of Peace Award, distinguished guest. This is time for us. Yes, there are so many things to be disclosed, to be discussed, to be understood. And I'm lucky that this forum has given me this opportunity. At least I talk to my friends, my brothers and sisters across the boundaries. And this is time to have a strong relation and ties, friend relation. And I would request organizers, please send to these respectable scholars my email address, so that, and my WhatsApp number as well, so that we could link up and we could create a genuine, peaceful environment, respecting to all culture, humanity, and overthrowing all kind of extremism, whether
Thank you so much.
it comes from A or B or C zones, nothing else. Because in Urdu, I would only dedicate one share for my friends. They might be knowing Urdu, because most of them, they know Hindi or Hindu. Indian people, they know, and from other part of the world, they also know Hindi and Urdu. कोई मसलक भी इख्तियार करे, कोई मसलक भी इख्तियार करे, आदमी आदमी से प्यार करे. Whatever you have, your religion and culture, but the basic religion or path of life is to love humanity. And this is a universal message from God to humanity, and from humanity to human being. Let's beat the challenges, control extremism, and understand the religious radicalism. What is meaning of religious radicalism, and respect for minorities. Obviously, minorities are the most important people. They belong to one nation, one family, one God, and that is a universal message. I'm thankful to all of you, my dear friends. I was talking to you, and I was looking at the smiling faces. Although you don't smile now, why? I'm not sure. Yes, this I need. This is my payment. I need payment. Cash, not in dollar transaction or like the lubricated money. No, I need actual money, your smile. And this is a great asset for me, for everyone. If we go for this, believe me, my friends, we would get a fruitful result. Otherwise, we will be roaming around, peeling the onion, getting out of it nothing, except I'm fine, you're sinful, I'm good, you are the worst. No. I have committed mistakes. I am made of mistakes. I'm a human being. I accept. And I would try my level best to rectify, to understand, and to be honest with others. If we create this culture, believe me, the radicalism, extremism, or fundamentalism would be known as only terminologies in past, as we see that city state or ideal state or other state. Thank you very much for
Thank you,
being with
sir.
me, and I'm thankful
Thank
for
you so much. I appreciate your view, sir.
being with you.
Now our next speaker, Anwar Arakhani, founder and director, Rohingya Association of Canada. Sir, may you proceed now.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Dear respected scholars, speakers, and the Sarim team who organized this, thank you very much. And it is an honor for me to be part of your effort. At least try to bring peace or hope for the peace to the people who have been suffering for most of their lives. I was just wondering if it is okay for me to share share the a presentation that I put together. Will that be all right, sir?
Yes, sure, sure.
Thank you. Let me see if I can get it. What I have put here is sort of something related to the topic of today, religious radicalism of Buddhists in Burma. I put this particular topic because I am from Burma, and what is happening in Burma is very related to this. That is the reason I put this particular topic. And the crisis started for the Rohingya. It is solely based on the basis of religion. There is absolutely nothing else. Maybe racial part would be, if I put into a percentage, it would be about 10%, but the 90% is based on the religion. The very infamous law 1982 Citizenship Act or Citizenship Law that was passed in Burma in 1982 that made the entire Rohingya nation stateless, stripping off of citizenship. They lost their citizenship rights is based on this law, which was drafted based on the religion. There is a famous saying, since that law was passed, there is a famous saying in Burma called "to be a Burmese is to be a Buddhist." Unfortunately, to be a Burmese is to be a Buddhist. I have seen in my life, and also sometimes it comes to the light of news writers, that sometimes twin brothers, sometimes biological brothers, one of them is full-fledged citizen, the other is considered foreigners because one is converted to Buddhism and then he automatically becomes the citizens of Burma and enjoy all the things that the citizen enjoy. The other remain enslaved or incarcerated or under heavy restriction because he is a Muslim. So the root cause of the entire Rohingya race is the religion. Now you see, the time picked up this monk as the face of Buddhist terror. It was in 2017 or 16 when he was campaigning. There is an organization called 969. In Burmese, it's called Ma Bata in short, which is state religion and race protection gang. So this, on the right side, you see a billboard, a huge signboard. These kind of signboards are all over the country. It was the government created them and let them reign free all over Burma to uproot, to completely cleanse the non-Buddhists, especially the Muslims. Here is a big monk, you see, sermoning or giving religious sermon to a big group of government officials, mostly police officers and some other officers. So this monk is very highly respected, one of the top monks in Burma. And what he said in his sermon is quite shocking. There is a writer, pick it up. I have a screenshot of it. Let me show it to you. It says here, the highlighted part is the killing of, oh, sorry, I need to go back. The killing of those who are not Buddhists could be justified on the grounds that they were not complete humans, or indeed humans at all. So he's openly declaring that the human beings who are not Buddhists are not human. Thus, it is allowed to kill and destroy them. So, because of those sermons, you see hundreds of masjid or places of worship in entire Burma have been destroyed, burned down, defaced. It was for many years, actually, not many months. Those started by the fiery speeches of those racist religious scholars, supported and abated by the racist regime. So these are the monks all over country, supported by the government, got out on the street and destroyed the masajid and madrasas belong to the Muslims. You see a monk here, I just put these two pictures, a monk with a long walkie-talkie, and on the right side of the screen, you see the police car carrying monks attacking Muslims. So this is a country where they're saying that we are a peace-loving country, we are a multi-religious country, but they're saying to the world that, but in reality, these are the face of Buddhist monks and acts of the Burmese government in Burma. In every attack, you will see monks and police collaborated. Monks collaborated with the public, everyday regular people, and sometimes police collaborated with the Buddhists to attack on Muslims. Here are a few pictures of those. So these are politicians on the bottom two, and then on the top left corner. Those three are very famous politicians in Burma. They are the main instigators of some of the main instigators of the crimes committed against Rohingya. And this guy, this monk, is also one of the very famous monk in Burma. He said, I highlighted, it is in Burmese, it was a news piece. He said there was a rumor that the gang leader Wiratu, the monk who was on Time magazine, was supposed to be killed or kidnapped, or some rumors. Then based on that, this monk said, I will give my life if you are to be killed. Before I give my life, I will kill hundreds of thousands of kalas. The kala is a derogatory word, especially used to describe the Muslims. So actually, everything happened. There is a um, the selling point of the government that always convey to the international community that these people, when they describe to non-Buddhists, they said these people come from another country, taking our land and taking our women. So that is the mostly excuse, but they never tell the truth to the international community. So always they would deny the historical background, historical facts. So this is one of the pictures taken in sometime in 40s prior to Burmese independence of Burma. In the center of the picture, his name is Mr. Emir Rashid. So he was the chairman of, at that time's, Burmese independent movement or student organization at Rangoon University, where the independence movement was started. Even this gentleman was never mentioned in any history, any curriculum, any textbook of Burma. He was the president of the whole organization, where Aung San, General Aung San, the so-called father of Burma, was the vice president or the general secretary of the organization. Now, they always say that the Rohingyas never exist. There is no name Rohingya. They never, these people, this race is not one of us, or not never existed. They came from somewhere else. These are some of the MPs that I listed. They were in the Burmese government. One of them was a minister. Actually, two of them are ministers, and there are a lot more. So all these government figures, they are now they're saying that the Rohingya never existed in Burma, and they are not from Burma. They're all illegal intruders from Bangladesh. So in factually, if we look the truth, look in a little bit deeper underneath the surface, we see who is coming or who are coming into Bangladesh. Burma. It's not the Muslims. It's not the Rohingyas. They have been killing and pushing out Rohingyas with full force for the last 4 to 5 decades. So all that are coming to resettle on the Rohingyas land are Buddhists, criminal Buddhists, either criminal Buddhists from all over Burma, proper Burma, from the jail, or the Buddhists from Bangladesh, sponsored by the state to be resettled on the Rohingyas land. And again, these are really, they're very well planned, well calculated a strategy to get rid of the entire Rohingya race plus the Muslims all over Burma. Burmese generals, every now and then, they would say this is a job, unfinished job of World War II. So it is a very, because why they say this is, when they were fighting for independence from British colony, and then again Japanese colony, and then second time British colony, because these independent movements went to Japan to get their support to fight against the British. Then when Japanese suppressed more than British, they rejoined the British to get the independence during the chaotic situation of World War II. During that period, they got rid of half of the entire population of Rohingya in 1942. It is known as 1942 massacre. That's why they, every now and then, they come up and say the issue of this Kala, the derogatory words that they used to describe us, is of World War II era. So because of their blatant lies and well-planned killing, so the Rohingya population, initially native, became citizen at some point. It will be confusing for most of you what is the difference between native and citizen. In Burma there is a big difference. When they say native, they are kind of above the law sort of thing, they have all the rights. Citizen is mere citizen, he could be a foreigner or married to a Burmese or kind of like that. So these are the interrogation of Rohingyas I just listed, the way it is existing now. Native citizen, native to citizen to suspected, and white card holders, and then now they are doing NBC. So at the end, it is unwanted. So we became unwanted since after 1912. 2012. It is the last stage. If I describe briefly about the current situation, all the Rohingyas land, Rohingya used to live the villages, towns, cities, everything, nearly all of them have been demolished, bulldozed. With the aid of China, they are building concentration camp. On the left side, you see barbed wire concentration camp, and supported and built by Chinese. On the right side, it is one of the areas of demolished Rohingyas village. So either these people remain or disappeared in the thin air or remain in Bangladesh. If they are to return to Burma, they would be directly going to these concentration camps until they die, and they live there, stay there until they die. So these are some other pictures, aerial pictures of concentration camps, newly built. Some of these are seen from the border side of Bangladesh. If you go there at the border, if you have a small binocular, you will see them very clearly. In Bangladesh side, because of the heavy pressure from China and India, Bangladesh is trying to relocate hundreds of thousands of refugees from the camps now to a remote island in one of the island. These buildings, red buildings, are built again by the Chinese, paid by the Chinese, and they are far away in remote island. On this island, there is no record of any human being living. Nobody lived there before. Only time human being has spent on this island is during the construction of this building. So they are in the process of taking hundreds of thousands of refugees to this island. It is about 5 to 6 hours drive by boat from the mainland Bangladesh. It is flood prone, nobody knows. In the monsoon season, no one knows whether they would survive or how many monsoon they would survive at all, if they do. So in the camp is infested with a lot of crimes, because when there is more than 1 million people at one place, there is no hope of their future, no survival, no education. And these people, they don't know what to do 24 hours, 7, doing nothing. Drug trafficking, human trafficking, sex trafficking is prevalent in the camp. Petty crimes are everyday life. Now disease. People are dying in hundreds every single day. Yaba, a kind of amphetamine tablet business, is the biggest disaster struck the camps. Because of that, a lot of crimes have been taking place for the last 3-4 months. So this is, I have come to almost the conclusion of my today's talk is Burma is the issue. People should not ignore it. Burma is a refugee production country. It has been producing refugees for the last 3, 4, or over 4 decades. It is not only the Rohingyas. We have 7, 8 major races in Burma. Every other races have been suffering under Burmese rules. Sometimes even Buddhists themselves have been suffering. Still, there are about 4 million, 3 to 4 million refugees, registered refugees in Thailand, Thai-Burma border. More than 10 million illegal migrant workers, Burmese migrant workers in Thailand because of Burmese government crimes committing on the public. Because of Burma's arrogance, the neighboring countries, this burden has been overflowing, spilling over to neighboring countries, Bangladesh, India, Thailand, Laos, China, Malaysia, Indonesia, sometimes Sri Lanka. Some countries are suffering more than others, but all these neighboring countries, sometimes not very close neighbor, Indonesia is quite far away, but still that country is suffering. So it is no longer feasible for international community to ignore the crimes that Burmese government has been committing. If the international community should realize that the longer the wait, the heavier the burden or the worse the crisis would be. So that is the message I would like to send to the international community from the platform of SARIM. And I would like to again commend the wonderful work of SARIM to at least try to bring a glimpse of hope for the people who have been hopeless for their entire life. And again, thank you very much for inviting me to share some of the crises the Rohingya have been suffering or going through in Bangladesh refugee camp and inside Burma. I hope with the work of all the scholars here today, through the work of SARIM, we will be able to see a better future in our lifetime. Jazakallah khair for your effort, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you so much, sir, for your well-researched analysis on the topic. Now I move to our next speaker, who is Mr. Dhananjaya, and he is from India's Telangana state. He is an author, poet, and has written 6 poetry books in Telugu language, and is also a researcher of caste origination. Sir, you may continue now.
Madam, thanks for your invitation, but our previous friend has to stop his screen sharing.
Yeah, sure. Yes, sir, you can share it.
Yeah. Namaste and Salam Alaikum. Of course, my introduction has been already given by Madam, and I think that this is my, good privilege to be with you all, and especially the topic what we have today in front of us. It is, quite interesting, and it is responsive, if not responsible, because there is a great concern across the globe for everybody to work for the establishment of the peace around. Okay. Now, I have few slides with me to share with you. We'll just go by one. And to start with, the true definition of religion, it is a social, cultural system of designated behaviors and practices, moral, worldwide, text, sanctified places, prophecies, and ethics. The Dr. B.R. Ambedkar feels, you all know, but Dr. B.R. Ambedkar is, apart from the architect of our Indian Constitution, he is one of the most renowned social activities across the globe. He says religion must mainly be a matter of principles only. It cannot be a matter of rules. And he also feels religion is for man, not man for religion. When we have let us have a glance at our different religions across the globe in the language of the percentage of the share. This is taken about on 2015 base. Okay, Christians are at 31.2%, and Islam is about 24.1%. Hindus about 15.1%. Buddhism. Buddhism about 6.9, and 22.5% being rest of the different types of religions. Coming to South Asian countries, about which we are concerned. Here, if you take the total population of about 194 crores and 76 lakh 28,100, the population stands. Okay. Here, again, when we look at the distribution of the different religions, if you, for example, if you take from the alphabetical order, in Afghanistan, it is almost 99.7% Muslims are there. In Bangladesh, it is 90 above, and in Bhutan, 75% Buddhists have the major share. They are 75%, and of course, rest are others. And if you come to the Nepal, Hindus are maximum, they are at 81.3%, and Pakistan, 97% Muslims are there. In Sri Lanka, it is 70% Buddhists are there. Then coming to India, see, we have seen the world, then we have come down to South Asia. Now coming to India, here Hindus constitute about 80.5%, and Muslims 14.2%, and this is Christians 2.3%, Buddhists are 2%, 6 are 0.3%. Okay, then rest all others. Then, while we intend to talk about the fate of the minorities in India, it is necessary to know about something about the origin of the Hinduism, because the country is now being ruled by the political party, which is being dominated by the Hindu religious people. So I feel that it is necessary to know a little bit about that. Okay. As such, my dear friends, you can't find any word called Hindu either in Bhagavad Gita or in Mahabharata or in Ramayana. It must be remembered by every one of us. And there was, Harappan civilization. Even we know that, once upon a time, even Pakistan, Balochistan or Sindh area and other things, they were of, one origin, that is, Indian continent, Indian subcontinent. That Harappa civilization was between 3300 to 1300 BCE, and then came the Vedic period. Vedic period, I think some of you know that, this Vedic people, they migrated from Iran, Iraq area to India, and that even Vedas also, they were composed during the same time. They were not composed at one time. Then comes to the other religious books called, Upanishads. Then the main point what is to be noted down here is that, India was dominated for centuries together by the Buddhism. When Mauryans were ruling India, the ruling yeah, I mean that religion what was existing was Buddhism. There was no Hinduism at that time. When one Manu, he composed that Manusmriti, which is called, of course, the religious constitution of Hindus in those days. It was composed in 200 BCE, in which there is, the system of order of the social order was mentioned, that Chaturvarna system. Chaturvarna means four varnas. That is, Brahmin, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras. Brahmins are supposed to be, most learned people, Kshatriyas to defend the country, and Vaishyas to do the business, and the Shudras to serve other three. That is the fate of the Shudras destined in holy books of Hinduism. This gradation also can be found in Bhagavad Gita, and also it can be found in the chapter of Purusha Suktam in Rig Veda, and of course it is also in the Manusmriti. Let us just have a look at how this Hinduism was evaluated. When Indo-Iranians entered into India through Punjab and Sindh region, they tried to identify themselves away from the natives of that place. So only identification mark was the Sindhu River. The beauty is that Iranians less spell Sindhu. Their C or S is like he. H, it is dominated by the he. So they pronounced it as Hindu. So then onward this word came into the formation. Of course, when Mughals, when they entered also, they followed the same thing. Then politically now, the formation of Hindu Mahasabha came into the being in the year 1915, when Mr. Madan Mohan Malaviya, who established the Banaras Hindu University, he established the party called, All India Hindu Mahasabha. With him, I mean, just it is about the time when All India Muslim League was established in 1906. Then came one Savarkar, who established the philosophy of Hinduism, Hindutva, and Hindudom, like kingdom, Hindudom. That means whole India he wanted to convert into Hindutva origin. Then a socio-cultural organization was formed by Hegdewar in 1925, that is called Rashtriya Swayam Sevak Sangh. Then coming to our main, the focus of discussion is the minorities. Let us just travel from the British India, not today's India. When British government accorded a separate electorate status to the Muslims and Sikhs, Dr. Ambedkar, he argued to allot the same thing to the Dalits, scheduled caste people of India. Like my dear, just now one friend was talking about Rohingya's fate elsewhere. The scheduled caste fate in India is much more worse than anywhere in the world. Ambedkar tried to distinguish the difference between slaves and the scheduled caste. Slaves, at least, they are safe under the masters, but they have at least some rights. Whereas scheduled caste, the Dalits in India, they are seen as untouchables. That means even no human can also touch them. That was the fate of those days. Even today also it is continuing. That is the reason, then Prime Minister Ramsay MacDonald, he declared communal award, giving special status to the Muslims, Christians, and Sikhs, as well as to the scheduled caste people of India. But Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, he started fastened to death hunger strike. It was the first and the only time Gandhi started fastened to death hunger strike, opposing this special award to the scheduled caste. Under the pressure to save the life of Gandhi, Ambedkar has signed a pact called Pune Pact on 24th September 1932. Of course, deviating from the MacDonald's proposal, he accepted for few more seats which are reserved for the scheduled caste and saved the life of Gandhi. Then, if you look at the plight of the Dalits in India today, every day, not less than 6 Dalit women are being raped across the country. And 90% of the Dalits, they are employed only in sanitation, cleaning, and manual scavenging. Believe it is still it is a order of India today. Of course, it is persisting in some parts of the other world also, which I don't want to mention much, but few countries also. And if you take the crime, for every 50 minutes there is a crime against Dalits in India. And majority of the minorities, not only Dalits, minorities, all minorities, they know almost they are sliding below the poverty line every year. And the cases which are being booked against the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe atrocities, they are not being properly addressed. Still 90% of the cases are pending in different courts, and the political depends on the higher caste people by these minorities, even by the Dalits are still increasing. There are about 9 states in India which constitute about 54% of the total population, but they account for 84% of the crimes in India. And there are roughly about 56,000 children every year they are dying for the reason of malnutrition. In my view, now coming to this radicalization, the reasons which are contributing to radicalization are relative deprivation. That deprivation is there in the people who are, constituting as a majority. Then support for the oppressors regimes. Whoever are in the control of the state, so they want to garner the support for them. And also it is a question of identity of the politics. Then another reason is that it is due to poor political and socio-economic environment which is prevailing in the country. In my view, it is a process by which an individual or group comes to adopt increasingly radical views in opposition to particular social or religious status quo. The impact of on this radicalization phases we can find normally how it occurs. First, the contact between radicalizing the man who is radicalizing the process and a person who is open to the radical views. That is phase 1. And in phase 2, what happens? There will be gradual change in the behavior of the people of this both radicalized as well as the man who is receiving it or who is opting it. Then in phase 3, what happens? Their social life activities with the family and friends and their social club, they get narrowing down and they become slowly isolated. And in last phase, they will be only concentrating on violent activities and violent scenes. These are the things normally, how it happens. Because of this, what is happening? The sense of insecurity among the minorities, it is increasing, undoubtedly, though there are governments, which may be, peripherally or tangentially, which are forming certain, safeguards to them, but they are yet to be normally entered into the administrative measures of the governments. Then, especially in India, nowadays, a tendency is being developed. It is developing rather. To be Indian is to be Hindu. It is a concern to minorities. Of course, till already when the government was with a secular mind, it was different. But now it is this sort of concern is being raised. But time and again, the people who are fighting for the civil rights and human rights, they are opposing it. And let us hope that the balance will be rather achieved soon. And this, because of the radicalization, there will be cracks in the social fabric of the society. Then the national spirit, nationality, that feeling in the citizens, it gets diminished. Then secularism will go under threat. Then religious tensions, takes place. among different religious people, then the peace which is up and apt for today's world is slowly gets, eroded. Then unfortunately, inter-religion conflicts, they arises, and global peace is a threat. Then finally, the religious freedom is deprived of. And we, of course, there are only a few points I like to mention. This, radicalization, this is bound to ignite the extremism. I am only talking about extremism. It is not extremism by a religion against another religion, because everywhere that extremism can be found. Now, a previous scholar also he said, who is not extremist, where there is no extremism, and which country there is not extremism. Okay. But strictly speaking, extremism in a scientific way, if you define, it is very, very, very philosophical and logical pronunciation. It is nothing but, putting your arguments at extreme end. It is not that, it is mixed with the inhuman things. Then there is a greater threat to the social and economical development also because of this. It is jeopardizing freedom of choosing a religion. I will not be allowed to choose my own religion at my will. My will to change religion is not allowed because of this. And basically, one more great danger is that it leaves minorities in lurch, not knowing where to go. It disintegrates the minorities from the main society. Then survival is becoming a question. And only thing, the thing, major religion will come into the dictating terms. And the effects of, this the radicalization we have seen in 2002 Gujarat violence on 11th September, Twin Tower demolishing, even in Mumbai attacks, in last week of the November 2008. In Paris on 13th November 2015, we have seen about 130 people, died. These are, to note, there are many. But what is today requirement is that there is a greater need for definitely, putting a full stop for these sort of things, number one. And number two, ultimately, humanity is great. First, human beings have taken birth in the universe, then came the religions. Let it be any religion. And every religion is scripted by human beings. Maybe, some prophets might have brought, are given, okay, let us not go into the nitty-gritty details, but what is required that humanity, the fabric of the humanity has to be knitted with, close gaps today. And I thank all of you for giving me this opportunity to share my views with you, and especially this South Asian, that this concern, not only just for the, purpose of talking to each other. I expect that slowly over a period of time, we grow into a big organization, from branch to branch, and ultimately we'll be, fulfilling the dream of the organizers of this summit to establish a very, very productive, meaningful dais for the peace of tomorrow. Thank you all. Jai Hind to you all.
Thank you very much for the detailed explanation. Now I would like to invite Dr. Mariam Shamniza Nazir. She is founding president, Counter Violent Extremism through Youth Empowerment Maldives. Madam, please continue.
Thank you very much. Could you please show my presentation?
Yes, please, you can share your screen with us.
So before I begin my presentation, I would like to thank Sarim and Dr. Khurram for inviting me to speak at this webinar. I'm very honored to receive an invitation. Since the theme of this webinar is religious radicalism and the security of South Asian minorities, I have chosen to speak about the impact of radicalization on minority women. In my presentation, I wanted to focus on 4 different areas. Unfortunately, I am unable to share the screen. The main reason why I chose to focus on women is because we are now into the 4th day of 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. Thank you, Dr. Khurram. Can you go to the 3rd slide, please? Next one. Yes. That is the outline. I wanted to talk about the religious radicalism, and then now what is religious radicalism? Before I talk about it, radicalization is the process by which an individual or group comes to adopt increasingly radical views in opposition to a political, social, or a religious status quo. So religious radicalism will be related to that is the process by which individual or groups comes to adopt increasingly radical views in opposition to a religious status quo. Now, as my fellow speakers also highlighted, we must keep in mind that this is not necessarily unique to a particular religion. It's not unique to Islam only. I would rather say it is common to all religions. Now, speaking about minorities, let us look at who are considered minorities under international law. Now, adopted by consensus in the United Nations Minorities Declaration in its Article 1 refers to minorities as based on national or ethnic, cultural, religious, and linguistic identity, and provides that states should protect their existence. Then I think it's I should at this point I should highlight that in the Maldives, our constitution does not recognize any minorities. As per our constitution, all Maldivians are Muslims, and we speak the common. We have only one language, Divehi. Keeping in mind that there is no internationally agreed definition as to which groups constitute minorities, it is often stressed that the existence of a minority is a question of fact, and that any definition must include both objective factors. By objective factors, I mean existence of shared ethnicity, language, religion, and subjective factors such as individuals that must identify themselves as a minority. Minorities are already marginalized and they do have grievances. If it is not addressed in a timely manner, with a little pull from the wrong groups, before we know it, they have shifted from mainstream beliefs to extreme ideologies. And this is a process in which people are influenced by their everydays, their own communities, and by the media and wider global and cultural pressures. Now, before I move on to the potential factors leading to radicalization of women, I'd like to put on record that I'm not saying or trying to portray that women are always victims. Women also have played active role in violence. The truth is, in most cases, women are victims or easy targets. Women and youth, of course. But since my presentation is focused on women, I will just focus on, I will not talk about youth. Now, can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah. Now, potential factors leading to radicalization of women include search for opportunities to participate socially and politically, and gender-based inequality and discrimination in society leading women to seek other ways to assert their identity and independence, or alternatively make women more susceptible to becoming passive victims of recruitment. Now, domestic abuse and violence against women leading women to seek means of escape. Now, lack of educational opportunities for women, especially these minority groups, they are already marginalized and they do have difficulties in access to education, access to justice, and although even access to healthcare. Now, lack of educational opportunities for women, which may make them more vulnerable to recruitment efforts. Then, my fifth point, I have noted essential social services and protection offered by radical groups in unstable areas where women have unmet needs for those services. A desire for companionship, a desire to have control over one's families, or being single, divorced, or widowed, and lacking the social standing. Because in some cultures, they look down on these groups of people, or these groups of women. So they reach a point where they need to have a male spouse as a guardian so that they have that social standing. Now, having close ties or relationships with radicalized men also is one of the reasons why women get radicalized often. Yes, impact of radicalization on minority women. There are already limitations on women's freedom in South Asia due to various factors such as cultural, religious beliefs. In some areas, women even don't or can't choose whom she wants to marry. So it is we have those limitations on our freedom, and this makes it worse for minority women. It worsens existing limitations on women's freedom and access to their rights, such as right to life, even marriage, family, healthcare, or the freedom from torture, slavery, freedom of opinion and expression, and even right to work and or a right to education. And sometimes, at times, women are blamed for their children's actions, especially in our region. In short, it is not a problem of minorities alone, or it does not stay within the minority groups. This is actually a global issue. Governments, communities, and individuals need to work together to prevent and counter religious radicalization along with all other forms of radicalization and violent extremism for a better future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Now, as we are running out of time, so I will just take one question from our participant who has asked about what policy measures should international organizations and South Asian countries should take to best meet the challenge of religious radicalism. And this question is from Sir Anwar Erkani.
The answer lies with the government. It is the government that is letting loose these goons to go around and rain hell on the community that the government intend to suppress. So the international community should hold the government responsible. There should be law and rules of law that governs the country, then what government does very conveniently is let one group suppress another group, sometime hiddenly help the group that is powerful to suppress, to reach the government's goal. So it is the government, international community, as well as human rights activists, they should hold the government responsible. I think that is the most appropriate way to solve the problem.
Thank you so much, sir. I would like to extend my thanks to all of you, and for the vote of thanks, I would like to invite Dr. Khurram Mehdi, the director of SAREM. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Kisa. I am very grateful to our speakers, Professor Dr. Mohammad Ahmed Khadri, Ma'am Cynthia Stephen, Mr. Dhananjaya, Mr. Anwar Arakani, and Dr. Mariam Shah Nasir from the core of my heart. They provided us with a broad spectrum of views covering every aspect of the topic, and some of them stepped up at a very, very short notice. It is really our great pleasure to have such a distinguished panel of experts. To conclude this webinar, I would like to quickly highlight a few points. First of all, radicalization is a process of change, a personal and political transformation, and becoming radicalized is a gradual process that requires a progression through distinct stages and happen neither quickly nor easily. Religious radicalization has long-term impact on the society, including security threats, mass migration, attacks, killing, economic stagnation, and hurting religious sentiments. The phenomenon is better understood in a rational and idea-driven framework. To control the menace of religious radicalization, international organization and the United Nations organization should play their role in identifying the elements, including the motivational and ideological components spreading the religious radicalization. Legislation should be designed to prohibit the misuse of internet as radicalization incubators. Issues of Kashmir, Palestine, and other important issues originating the religious radicalization should be solved. Even the UN also guarantees life, liberty, equality, security, human right protection, and so on. Last but not least, in Pakistan, organizations are actively working for the security of minorities, and the government is also supporting them. The Hindus, Christians, Sikh communities. An opening of Kartarpur corridor is a good step, and it will promote the tolerance and interfaith harmony. I once again thanks all of our speakers and look forward to your continued support in the form of intellectual discussion at this forum, advocating for issues of minorities in the region. Thank you very much. God bless you all.
Everyone for joining us today. Hope you see you soon again. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Goodbye, everyone.